Okay, welcome back, everyone. The two or three of you who actually take the time to view these videos. I hope you continue to do so, and for the rest of you, well, I guess this wouldn't apply to you because you're probably not listening anyways. I would merely admonish you to remain diligent with respect to your duties as students, even though I know that this is an unconventional type of class, but nevertheless, we have to adjust, we have to evolve, we have to assimilate ourselves to the changing dynamics in society, and hence we find ourselves in the situation. So we make the best of a bad situation, if in fact it is a bad situation, and I submit to you that it is not. But anyways, I would strongly encourage you, and this is merely reinforcing what I believe I've already said several times, and at the risk of sounding redundant, I think it's incumbent upon me to say this again because it seems to me that some of you are not yet taking this responsibility seriously, because the numbers seem to be lacking. The number of views of the YouTube videos, and I'm not concerned about this because I'm some narcissist that wants attention. I don't care how many people look at these videos. What I care about is whether or not there's at least a number of views that is commensurate with the number of people that are actually enrolled in this class. And thus far, I can say that that has not been the case for the last couple of lecture videos, because I've viewed them at least once, sometimes twice, just to make sure that they're properly uploaded and formatted. And then on top of that, there may be 3 or 4 other people who view them, assuming they only view those videos once. And maybe, I don't know, maybe one person is viewing them twice or 3 times, and that would mean that only me and one person are actually viewing these videos. I hope that's not the case, but maybe it is. I don't know. So what I would say is that remember, first of all, that these videos are the equivalent to your class. These are the functional equivalent to the class that we would ordinarily be conducting if in fact we were meeting in person. So don't denigrate the utility, the pedagogical utility of these videos merely because I'm some guy who's sitting behind some desk in some rather ostentatious looking office in Bloomfield Hills, and that you think that this doesn't really apply to you because I'm here and you're there, or you're there and I'm here, and so on and so forth. Well, it does apply, and I'm really doing the best that I can, and I'm doing this because, reverting back to all the arguments that I made last time, the case for my remaining here still is as salient as ever it was, and therefore I do this because I feel as though I have to, but I'm also doing this because I believe it's really the only logical way forward, the only way to reconcile and balance the interests, as they say. Okay, now before I turn to issues of substance today, I want to address a few administrative points. First and foremost, you guys will be, I hope, rather encouraged to know that, well, some of you may be, some of you won't be, some of you will be dismayed, I would think, that this will actually, presumably, all right, right now, tentatively, this should be the last time that you will have to listen to a YouTube lecture video for Political Science 101. I hope. Right? We can all aspire to that objective. Whether or not that actually is consummated, who knows? Who knows what can happen between now and the end of the semester in the middle of December, or I think it's the second week in December. The situation up there from an epidemiological standpoint could worsen. It could be exacerbated if people continue to not wear masks. But right now I'm looking at the numbers, and the cases seem to be going down. The new case rates on a daily basis seem to be going down, which is good. Not to say that that can't change precipitously and very, very rapidly, which it can, but right now it seems as though the situation is stabilizing to the extent that, well, it's stabilizing, which is a good thing. The corollary point, which is, I think, more significant for your purposes, is that I will be returning back to the Keweenaw because my parents will be leaving within the next 10 days. In fact, I think it's exactly, not quite exactly 10 days from today. It's 8 days from today. Today is Friday the 16th of October, or the 15th of October. I don't know. It's the Friday before next Friday. I don't know actually what the date is, but it's I will be returning on Saturday the 24th, I believe, is the date. So that must mean today's the 16th. I think that's right. Anyways, that means that we will resume our in-person, interpersonal physical class on that following Tuesday, which will bring us to, let's see, that would be the 24th, the 27th, I believe that's going to be. I think that's right. Yes, that's the 27th. So plan on that. Okay, that's just, again, that's just an advisory. It's not a warning or anything, but that's what we're planning on doing right now. And that's a good thing because I'm getting rather wary of having to record these videos. I don't like having to talk to myself in this room for as long as I have to. And it's actually difficult. Believe it or not, this is actually more difficult, I think, in many ways. This is more difficult than talking to a live studio and indeed captive audience that I have in all of you when you're in our room together, because you have nowhere to run to and no place to hide. Ha 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 ha. But now I just have to sit here and talk to myself, which, as I said, for various reasons is difficult. But this is coming to an end very soon. Now, that's the first announcement. The second announcement is it's sort of an announcement. There's two things that I have to announce in conjunction with each other because they're sort of interrelated. First of all, I'm not this as I said, this will be the last lecture recording, even though this is ostensibly the lecture that will be viewed in conjunction with this coming Tuesday. Okay, so this coming Tuesday will be the 19th of October, I think. Again, I don't have a calendar in front of you guys. I'm just kind of estimating here. 19th or the 20th or whatever that would be the 20th. This video is meant to be viewed in lieu of our physical class on the 20th. Now I'm not going to record any more lecture videos after this. I'm not doing this because I'm lazy. I'm not doing this because I have some other functional disincentive to disengage from the process of doing my job. I'm doing this because what I have decided to do is to reconcile myself with the fact that I'm teaching a political science class in the midst of one of the most important elections in my lifetime, certainly. Whether or not it's the most important election in your lifetime remains to be seen, because you guys have long lives ahead of you, I hope. And I've still got some life left in me, even though I know I look rather decrepit. But we'll see. This is one of the most consequential elections because it's essentially a referendum on an autocratic president. Now I'm not making any judgments one way or the other, but I think that that's fundamentally what it comes down to. Now, obviously, it's more nuanced than that, and you could say, I mean, I think what nobody wants to talk about is whether or not having an autocratic president, an executive who is less restrained by the imprimatur of constitutional constraints, is a good thing or a bad thing. And if you say that it's a good, if you vote for the guy, then you're ostensibly, I mean, in actuality, you're asserting that that's a good thing. I don't know why the people on the right can't concede that point. I think because it makes them look fascistic, or it lends some credibility to the accusations that are being made against them by the left. But those are just, spurious accusations, and that's the way you should treat them. But anyways, because this is a political science class, and because I think that we would be squandering an opportunity if we didn't seize upon this moment in time, this historical moment in time, because it is a historical moment in time. Now, I don't want to insinuate that the situation as grievous as many of the news outlets would have you believe it to be, because many people are prophesizing that this will be the descent into anarchy and chaos and disorder, and civil strife will abound, and it will be Civil War Part 2. I don't think that's very likely. Now, I'm not going to go into the reasons why I don't think that's likely, but if you really want some consolation, you can call me up and we'll talk about this. We can talk about it all the long day. But it's not particularly relevant to this conversation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you guys to go out to YouTube. Not really go out to YouTube, because presumably you're going to be doing whatever it is you're doing right now, because I would assume you're sitting in the chair that you ordinarily would sit in when you watch YouTube videos anyways, because that's what you're doing right now. So you don't really have to go anywhere. But you I guess in a metaphorical sense, you go to YouTube. You hit the link and you go to YouTube. And what you're going to do is you're going to watch the YouTube video that corresponds with the recording of the first and what seems to be at this point probably the only presidential debate, which I think this transpired all the way back on September 29th. I think, God, has it been that long? It's been almost 3 weeks ago now. Right, I think it was 3 weeks ago from this last Tuesday, I believe it was. Well, anyways, the date isn't significant. What I want you to do is I want you to watch that debate I should say the debate in its totality, not the precursor to the debate, because there's a lot of material that precedes it that is really relevant to what I'm going to get into here in a minute. But what I'm asking you to do, and what I really do sort of mandate that you do, is watch the entirety of the debate, and watch it closely and scrutinize it carefully, and most importantly, what I'm going to be asking you is a series of questions, and these questions, I've listed them. They're adumbrated in this document that I have in front of me, and I'm going to go through this document very systematically so you understand exactly what's being asked of you, and there's no ambiguity concerning the requirements of the assignment, because I don't want anybody to throw their hands up after the fact and say, I didn't know what you expected of me with respect to this assignment, Jeff. So I don't want that to happen, and therefore I'm going to preemptively clarify precisely what my expectations are in relation to you, so that there should be no consternation or ambiguity or unknown variables with respect to how to go about completing this assignment and what it is I'm actually asking and expecting you to do. So one of the themes in this class, and hopefully you've apprehended this by now, is to inculcate in you the capacity to make qualified judgments as to the veracity of material that you encounter. Not just political material, material that has some propagandistic value to it. Obviously, to be able to discern between that which has some propagandistic function to it and that which actually is true objectively on its face. That is an important capacity that you have, not with respects to your civic utility and your civic virtue as a citizen, to be able to express your vote and your opinion in a way that's informed by rational calculus and analytical calculus, but also just to engage with the world around you in general. It's important to be somebody who has these analytical propensities so as to be able to weigh and to measure and to balance and to evaluate the relative weight of any particular decision that you make. And that fundamentally, as far as I can see anyways, it seems to me that that's the fundamental problem with this country right now, is that everything is modulated through the prism of the lens, if you will, the filter of ideological partisan affiliations. And it ought not be that way. I can't tell you how often, just recently actually, how often I've been on LinkedIn. And if you guys don't have a profile on LinkedIn, I recommend you establish one, you create one for yourself. It's sort of my friend, my best friend, he's a sales executive for a automotive company down here. He calls it he calls it Facebook for grown-ups. I don't know if I would qualify it in those terms, but I would say that it's a social networking website, but its primary function is to connect people, professional working people, with each other in the same working domain, in that particular, whatever the niche that you happen to occupy in the economy happens to be. So it's a professional networking website is essentially what it is. And in this particular election cycle, in the last 6 months especially, this has been even more exacerbated than it was before. I can't tell you how many innumerable instances I've seen where people who are professionals, I mean, doctors, business entrepreneurs, salespeople, attorneys, professors like myself, etc., educational people, going on to LinkedIn, which is ostensibly a website that really is not meant for the expression of some subjective political partisan ideology, going on there on a professional networking website and espousing particular political viewpoints. And I just had this long discourse with somebody who is he's the chairman of some partisan, I don't know, lobbying organization in Washington, D.C. And I went back and forth with this guy for a long time, actually, because he posted something about how he was recommending that people advocate and support the Supreme Court nominee, Donald Trump's most recent Supreme Court nominee. Well, I think I guess not his only, because he nominated Gorsuch before her, but Amy, whatever her name is, Barrett. And he was suggesting or insinuating that it's a good thing that she's a Christian, because that will somehow temper her judgment and make her more just and equitable person to evaluate the cases that come before her. And I asserted, firstly, very nicely, and after he tried to delete my posts, not so nicely, that was actually antithetical to the concept of justice, which ostensibly ought to be blind to ideological as well as theological considerations, and that you as a member of the judiciary, you, in theory at least, whether it's Amy Barrett or anybody else for that matter, should not have their judgment contaminated by some kind of partisan, ideological, or theological considerations. That she should not perceive her duties and her function vis-a-vis the administration of justice through the lens or the filter of her particular religious convictions. That's again, that is the antithesis of how justice ostensibly ought to operate. And that's the problem, is that people think that that's a good thing. Well, I would just submit, and this is sort of arguendo right now, but I would just submit, turn it around. What if it's a Biden nominee in 2022, when they may conceivably expand the court from 9 justices to 11, and then they pack the court with their own hyper-liberal, progressive candidates? What's going to happen when he nominates a Muslim? Because if you're advocating for a Christian, a Catholic for that matter, and you think that her Catholicism is going to imbue in her certain qualities and characteristics that will make her, or predispose her to be more effective in her role as a administrator and adjudicator of justice, then you can't say um, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 years down the line, when there's a Islamic candidate, that person's being a Muslim is somehow incompatible with their capacity to render judgment in a truly just and equitable manner. In other ways, you have to adhere to the principle which you staked out for yourself. And so that's the problem with this country as I see it right now. Not that you guys asked for my opinion on these things, but this does actually have a functional relationship to the assignment that I'm asking you guys to complete. And the relationship is this: the nexus between what I just said and the point that I'm trying to elucidate through this assignment is essentially and concisely, it is this. This assignment is asking you to look at and evaluate in as dispassionate and objective a manner as possible, as you are able to, the substantive criteria of the debate. So the substance of what's actually being elaborated on and what's actually being advocated for by the two candidates as they expound upon their competing positions. I want you to dissociate yourself from any subjective, personal, partisan, ideological prejudices that you may have going into this. Right? That's the whole point, is that I'm trying to condition in you the same qualities that were conditioned in me when I went through law school and when I went through the various graduate programs that I went through, and just through really my own immersion in philosophy in general, is to be able to look at things really objectively, okay, and to evaluate things based on the merits, based on whether or not it's a convincing and compelling argument. Is this a persuasive argument on the facts? As opposed to merely conceding that I should vote for this particular person or consent to this particular amendment or advocate for this particular judicial nominee, merely out of consideration for the fact that that's being advocated or recommended by my particular party. And because I have allegiance, some partisan ideological allegiance to that particular party, I have affiliation with the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, or whatever this happens to be, that ipso facto, that should be the ultimate arbiter of how I come down on whether or not this is a good proposition or whether this is a bad proposition. Because that is the road to tribalism. That is the road to all manner of divisiveness and contentiousness. And that merely serves to divide the electorate and divide us even more so than we already are. And by tribalism, I mean the sort of politics that are described rightfully so as identity politics, merely voting a certain way because the people who you tend to identify with, whether they look like you or they talk like you or they sound like you or they have the same ideological perspective as you do, right? Merely out of consideration for your uniformity with those other people, you're going to vote in a way that is consonant with the way you think they're going to vote, because like attracts like, and that's just the way we should adjudicate life. Well, I humbly submit to you, in all fairness and in all equity, I believe that is not the way that you should proceed. That's contrary to a proper, objective, analytical approach to evaluating the facts in a dispassionate and clear-minded manner. And it really obfuscates your capacity to really look at these things objectively. And this is not just merely a philosophical argument that I'm making just for the sake of arguing. This does have some tangible, pragmatic, real-world consequences. And I think that, therefore, it's an efficacious exercise in conditioning in you the kind of, again, judiciousness that I hope that you will glean as a consequence of your exposure to the material in this class. So that's just a very long, sort of circuitous way to make the point, which fundamentally is that this is an exercise in analytical capabilities, an exercise of your analytical capabilities, what I should say. And I guess the best way that I could really expound on this is to just essentially summarize the directions. I'm not going to read them verbatim because I think that would be hopefully redundant, because I recommend that you guys take this assignment very seriously. This assignment overall is going to be about 70 points. Now that's not quite as many points as would be associated with the test, but it's almost as many points as were associated with the first test. Your guys' first test was 90 points. This is 70, so that's, you do the math, that's 80% of the 78% of the value of the points on the first test. That this is a substantial assignment. Okay, it's a very substantial assignment, and you should accord it the requisite degree of seriousness that is commensurate to the value of points which are represented by it, which is to say that take it as seriously as it needs to be taken, and it ought to be taken very seriously because it's worth a lot of points. And so it would behoove you to dedicate some considerable time to this assignment. Now, going back to what I was saying about not having a class on Thursday, or not having a virtual, not having to listen to me on YouTube on Thursday, or whenever it is you actually get around to watching these videos. And I don't care when you do it, just as long as you do it sometime before we actually reconvene on Tuesday the 27th. That's what I'll say, just categorically for the record. There it is. There you have it. But why is there no class on Thursday? Well, because what I want you to do, apportion the time that you ordinarily would have apportioned towards the listening of whatever it was I would have been talking about had I actually intended on recording a substantive lecture for that day. Reallocate that time towards watching another YouTube video, not a YouTube video of me sitting here in this boring, mundane, ostentatious, luxurious environment, right? Not this YouTube video, but rather the YouTube video of the two presidential candidates for the 2020 nomination, right? I want you guys to watch the presidential debate, right? Now, this debate in its totality is about 2 hours long, but if you skip the perfunctory introductory materials, which I've done that for you, because the link that I provide in this document, which I'm going to email to you guys probably tonight, which is Friday, so you have it. You're going to have it 10 days before it's actually due. The link here brings you to the point in the YouTube video, the chronological point in the YouTube video itself, where it's already skipped by the introductions and all that. So it's whatever his, I forget the guy who does the moderator, but it doesn't matter. It brings you to where you need to be. So in total, you're going to spend about an hour and I think 25 minutes roughly watching the debate itself. So what I would be doing, right, if in fact we were meeting in person, in the flesh, so to speak, on Thursday, what I would be doing anyways, right, so the fact that we're meeting virtually is immaterial. It's a moot point in this particular instance. Because what I would be doing anyways on Thursday would be having you guys sit in our class in room 104 in the Copper Country Center and watching the YouTube video of the recording of the presidential debate, right? So you're going to do what we would end up doing anyways in class. And that's why I'm not going to make a lecture video in association with this coming Thursday's class, which will be whatever that is, whatever date that is. That I don't even know who knows what that is, right? I'm not making a lecture video though in association with that class, because I intend for you to use that time, dedicate the time that you would otherwise dedicate towards listening to me talk for an hour and 23 minutes or whatever it has to be, right? Dedicate that time, reallocate that time towards the watching of the actual presidential debate. And when you watch this debate in as a prerequisite to completing the requirements of this assignment, because you can't complete this assignment unless you watch the debate. I only watched about 45 minutes of that debate, but that was enough for me to draw certain conclusions and make certain inferences that would allow for me to render some sort of judgment as to what I thought, what I saw, and what I thought about what I saw, and to give you some kind of coherent analysis with respect to my interpretation of what I was perceiving as I was watching and listening. But that's not to say that 45 minutes will be sufficient for any of you. Okay, I mean, not to say that, oh, I'm just so much more lucid in my comprehension of these things than any of you. I think I'm just probably better at making stuff up. Okay, I'm probably better at saying a lot, right? Maybe not substance, but just interjecting my own commentary and making it seem as though I actually have a lot to say when in actuality maybe I don't. So what I want you guys to do is actually dedicate the hour and 25 minutes, however long it takes for you to get through the entirety of the debate. I want you to watch it, and I want you to watch it closely, and I want you to scrutinize it carefully, and I want you to take notes while you're watching it. Well, you don't have to do that necessarily, but I would recommend doing it, because I think it would be helpful to have those notes, to go back and reflect upon those notes when you're actually going about answering these questions. There's 7 questions on this assignment. This assignment is, as I say, it is commensurate in its value to a test. Nearly so, not absolutely, but nearly so. All right, it's nearly equivalent to a test. So again, I want you to take it very seriously, and that's why I'm going to be sending this assignment out via email tonight. So I'll be disseminating it to you guys tonight, which is the 16th of October. It's not due until October 27th, which is the Tuesday after this coming Tuesday. All right, so you guys are going to have 10 full days to reflect upon this assignment, to go out there and immerse yourself in the YouTube video that's associated with it as a prerequisite to actually answering these questions, and then to formulate your answers in a way which is consonant with your best analysis of the video itself, the presidential debate itself. Now, again, what I'm asking you to do, what I'm requiring you to do, and I say this very explicitly in the directions, and please don't fail to do this, because if you fail to do this, then it defeats the whole purpose of the assignment, and I'm not going to be very satisfied with your answers if you fail to do this. What I want you to do is, again, dispossess yourself of any particular partisan, political, ideological inflections that your perception of the debate would otherwise have, right? I don't want there to be This is not some ideological commentary. I don't want you to interject your own personal political narrative with respect to, Donald Trump may be your man. Maybe Joe Biden is your man. I don't know. I don't care. All right. I don't have a right to know. I don't have a need to know. It doesn't concern me. Okay. Nor should it concern you what I think about this. I mean, I think they're both devious and mendacious, and I think they're both douchebags, and I think they're equally unqualified. Maybe not equally, but nearly equally unqualified for the office of the President of the United States for different reasons, of course. But I wouldn't vote for either of them. If you put a gun to my head on November 3rd and said, Jeff, you got to vote either one way or the other, I'd probably vote for Trump, but that's a long story. So just so you guys know, because I think most of you guys are probably Trump supporters, I can probably deduce that much based on what I've seen in terms of your articles of clothing, based on how you carry yourself, based on where you live, the demographic, etc. I'm not presupposing anything. I'm not making any judgments about you. But I don't want anybody to say, because they think that I have this contemptuous disposition towards Trump, that therefore I must despise the guy. I don't. I mean, I dislike him, but I dislike Biden too. So I'm an equal opportunity offender of sensibilities, as I think one of our comrades actually put it very eloquently and concisely, much more concisely than I can ever put it. Okay, so I want to wrap this up, though, because I'm coming up on 25 minutes here, and this class is only going to be an hour and another hour long, if that. It's important to take this seriously, right? That's point number one. Point number two is the deadline for this is Tuesday, October 27th. This has to be in my hands, either virtually or physically, right? In my hands, no later than the commencement of class on Tuesday, October 27th. So the commencement of class for us is 10 a.m. in the morning, right? That's when our class starts. So you can either you have two ways of completing this assignment. I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna be very explicit about this because I don't want there to be any confusion, any lingering ambiguity about this. Right? You can either you can print this off, and you can answer these questions, and you can feel free to adjust the spacing parameters on this document as much as you need to, because you may write in a very flowery manner. I don't know how you write. I don't know what don't write in cursive. Print. Okay. If you print this document off on a printer and you write out your responses the old-fashioned way, and you give it to me in the beginning of class, and it needs to be in my hands by the beginning of class on Tuesday, October 27th. If it is not physically in my hands by that time, by 10 a.m. or whenever it is we actually begin that class, 10:01, whatever time that is, right? Then you're going to suffer immediate and substantial and irreparable point loss. Don't force me to do that. Don't compel me to do that, but I will do that. I will do that because not doing that would be inconsistent with what I just represented to you, and that would be hypocritical of me. So you can either submit this to me in person. All right. Now, if you don't have reasonable access to a printer, or if obtaining access to a printer would be an unreasonable imposition for you, I understand that. And I'm going to make this accommodation because, after all, we are engaged in an online modality of instruction. So, pursuant to the modality of instruction that we've been utilizing now for the last 2.5 weeks, I'm going to allow you the discretionary decision to either submit this to me in my hands, physically in person, on October 27th at the commencement of class, or make sure that it is submitted to me virtually, meaning that you sent this to my email, jputz@bu.edu, which I know you all have and you all know about because I correspond using that email. Submit that to me no later than the commencement of class. Again, same time, same deadline, right? But different form in terms of submitting this to me. You can submit it physically or electronically. I don't care. Either way, you guys are going to have 10 days, right? I've been very explicit about what the requirements of this assignment entail. So I don't think any of you should be confused as to what is being asked or expected of you. I want you to seriously reflect upon the questions that are being asked of you. And I want you to give me answers which suggest that you've given some reflective, analytical consideration to these questions. So I'm going to go through and very briefly just ask the questions, okay? And I guess I'm just going to make clarifications as I think may be warranted, just so you know what these questions are asking you to do. The first question is, identify any substantive political proposals or positions which both candidates advocated for or enunciated in the course of their respective speaking times. Remember that substantive issues concern matters of policy, such as economics, geopolitical or international relations, social programs, etc. So, for instance, if Joe Biden says, I have a plan that's going to deal with COVID, I have a plan that's going to remediate and redress and rectify all the chaos and all the disorder that has flowed from the improper response by the Trump administration to COVID going all the way back to March. I have a clear-cut, concise, highly effectual plan, and here's what it entails, and so on and so forth. And he goes through and he elaborates and elucidates what that plan entails. That's what I mean
by a substantive political proposal. Okay. Conversely, if Trump says, "Oh well, here's my position on free trade. Here's my position on China," right? I'm gonna enact some embargoes, or I'm gonna lift the tariffs that we've got, or I'm gonna continue the trade war, something like that, right? That deals with international relations. It deals with the economic policy of the United States, right? That's an issue of substance, right? Versus an issue of rhetoric, right? A rhetorical issue or a semantic issue, right, or an issue of form, I guess you could say, in contrast to an issue of substance, is to say, well, that's kind of substance is what they say, form is how they say it. Okay, that's how I would differentiate between form and substance with respects to our critique of a political performance, because after all, this is the art of performance. This is the art of the deal, if you will, to take a stale borrow phrase from our esteemed president. Um, the art of the deal, and the deal in this particular case is getting enough people to believe that you're not a total douchebag to the extent that they're willing to vote for you, right? Because I think that that's the choice that we have, is the lesser of two evils, not the better of two goods, as some people would aspire to have the choice actually be. It's the lesser of two evils. It's a repeat of 2016 in many ways. It's that same kind of dynamic. Now, when you're answering these questions, I want you to keep bear in mind that not only am I requiring you to answer these questions, um, which, I mean, this is the requirement of the assignment, okay? But I want you to think about these things abstractly so that you can constructively engage in some kind of discourse on this particular subject when we reconvene on Tuesday, October 27th. Because one of the first things I'm going to do in that class, that early morning class, which I am already not looking forward to because that'll be the earliest I've gotten up in the last 3.5 weeks. I've been sleeping till noon. I'm sure many of you will be unsurprised to hear. Some of you would be gratified to know that. You'd be gratified to know that your professor is finally catching up on sleep. I know that's what makes your day. That's what makes your entire week, right? No, I know you're indifferent to these considerations, but that's not the reason why I'm down here. Okay, so don't insinuate that. I already went through those reasons, and hopefully you remember them. The other thing though is I'm going to discuss this in class, and when I say discuss, I mean I want a dialectical exchange, because I have been dispossessed of my ability to engage in dialectics for the last 2.5 weeks through no fault of your own. In fact, well, through no fault of my own either, just by virtue of circumstance, I suppose. We're all victims of circumstance in one way or another, and here we are. So I want you to be able to answer not just these questions, but to just think more abstractly about the debate. For instance, one of the things that I want to talk about is, what is the function of a presidential debate? I didn't ask that question in this assignment, but I want you guys to think about this, right? Just in the back of your mind when you're going through and answering these questions, because I'm going to ask this question probably in class. What is the purpose? What are they trying to do? Seems to me that the purpose for either of them politically, in relation to their political aspirations, is to convince the people who are as of yet unconvinced. Now, what does that mean? Because if you look at the dichotomy between the left and the right now, the two warring factions ideologically for power in this country, especially right now, because that dichotomy is much more exacerbated, it's more profound. The chasm that exists between left and right is far and wide, farther and wider than it's ever been before, at least in my lifetime, and that's going all the way back to Reagan. So that's a while. But the point is that the purpose of the debate is not necessarily to reinforce the political convictions of those people who are going to vote for either Biden or Trump. Those people are going to vote for Biden or Trump regardless of what those two guys do. Okay, if Trump, as Trump rightfully said, I think he was right about this, and even his opponents have to concede this point. He said it, I think 4 or 5 years ago. He said, I could shoot somebody in the middle of Times Square in broad daylight in the back of the head, and still there'd be 80 million Americans who would vote for me. Now, I think that's not hyperbole. I think that is a fairly accurate, factually accurate statement on its face. I think that's ipso facto actually true. I think there would be maybe not 80 million, but I think 50 million people would vote for him regardless of whether or not he shot somebody or raped somebody or did whatever he did. I don't think they care. I don't think they care. I think they look at it and they say, well, the ends justify the means, judging by his record, and see what he's done thus far, and that's a pretty good indicator as to what he's going to do in the next 4 years, if in fact we give him the mandate to do so. And conversely, the people who are going to vote for Biden, which I think is more of a vote for Harris than it is a vote for Biden, because I think what's very likely going to happen is he's going to be either incapacitated by virtue of him dying, number one, and I'm not suggesting that that's a good thing. I think at the end of the day, I think he's a decent and honorable man, despite his proclivity for grabbing young women and doing all sorts of hands-on type stuff. But he's just a physical guy, right? Physicality is not in and of itself evidence of you being a pervert or having perverse motivations. But I think he's going to be incapacitated. and then we're going to get Harris. So it's really a vote for Harris. A vote for Biden is a vote for Harris, or they're indistinguishable. And those who are voting for Harris will vote for Kamala no matter what, right? And there's maybe 50 million people that are like that, right? So the point of the debate is not to reinforce or to fortify the convictions of those people who are already going to vote for you, because they're going to vote for you no matter what, no matter how much of an ass clown you come across as being, or a D-bag, or a tool, or whatever, because those guys already are a couple of tools as far as I'm concerned. Pence is more distinguished. I think I don't know enough about Kamala Harris. I just know what she said about the Second Amendment. I find it to be, quite frankly, dangerous and highly erratic of her to say those things. But the point is that they got to convince the people in the middle, the people who are undecided. Now you got to ask yourself the question: in what is the best way, the most effective and efficacious and expedient means that I can go about utilizing in the course of this debate, so as to convince the people who are in the middle, the people who are on the fence, the people who are undecided. They are indecisive as of yet. They haven't made up their minds. There's not a lot of people left, all right? And of course, people are always talking about the silent majority this, the silent majority that. I don't think there's much of a silent majority left. I think most people have made up their minds on this. I don't think there's a lot that really needs to be arbitrated at this point, because we've already adjudicated the matters that are most salient for most people anyways. We know who Trump is. We sort of know what Biden is. We know that he's not Trump, and that seems to be what he's running on anyways. And I know some of this is just political commentary, but that's what this class is all about. This is a political science class, and it would be, I think, I would be doing all of you, and indeed myself, an incredible disservice if I was not to seize upon the reality of the times in which we live. And the reality of those times is that we are living in the midst of one of the most consequential election cycles, again, of my lifetime, and potentially of yours as well. I don't know. So it behooves us to think about these things. It behooves us to discuss these things. It behooves us to reach a rational conclusion, which is informed by the best analysis and the most fair and impartial consideration of the relevant facts. And that's why I'm asking you to do this assignment. Now, the other point I'm going to make before I move on to question number 2 is this. Understand, I hope you guys understand, I don't ask very much of you in this class, right? I mean, look at this lecture, for God's sakes. Thus far, I haven't really talked about anything of substance. I've just, been talking about this assignment. I've been talking about the political election cycle in the abstract thus far. I haven't been asking you to really memorize anything or even learn anything thus far. And just reinforcing points that I think I've already reiterated before. But the point here is that my expectations in terms of the workload associated with this class are fairly low. I don't really expect you guys to do very much. I expect you to listen to these YouTube videos at a very minimum. That's the de minimis expectation that I have, and I don't think I can expect anything less than that. And I expect you to do the readings. But thus far, what have I really expected you to read? I mean, I asked you to read 2 chapters. And I think I've been asking you to read chapter 2 for the last 3 weeks now. So if you haven't read it yet, I don't know why that would be in fact the case. It seems to me that you'd be rather derelict if you haven't read that by now. And we're not even coming up to the point where we're not nearing the threshold that delineates between chapter 2 and chapter 4. Because remember, I said we're going to skip chapter 3 because there's just not enough in that to really warrant covering it. But I'm not going to ask you guys to read chapter 4 until probably 2 or 3 weeks from now. So you don't really have a lot to do outside of just listening to what I have to say in these YouTube videos, or coming to class and taking notes, and being studious and assiduous with respect to those things. So there's really not a lot of work associated with this class, as far as I can tell. Right now, maybe it seems otherwise to you. I don't know. Maybe that's the case, but I don't think you can rationally make that argument. So therefore, I don't think it's unreasonable for me to expect this for you guys to actually do this in the course of 10 days. Okay, that's the point that needed to be made. Number 2. What deficiencies did you perceive in the performance of Vice President Biden? These could either be deficiencies with respect to the manner in which he comported himself, the tone, language, lucidity, and coherence in the conveyance of his message, or conversely, deficiencies with respect to the substance of what he actually asserted. Logical inconsistencies, objectively immoral, unethical, or hypocritical propositions, etc. Right. So what I'm saying is, again, I want you to differentiate between form and substance here when you're critiquing and evaluating whether or not Biden gave a convincing performance, whether it was a good performance or whether it was a bad performance. Right? There's 2 ways, 2 metrics that I'm evaluating, that I'm asking you to use when you evaluate the merit of his performance, whether or not it was a persuasive and compelling and convincing performance, or if it was not. And give me the reasons as to why you think that was the case, one way or the other. And so there's two metrics that you're going to use, or two ways in which you're going to proceed with this analysis. Number one is you're going to say, did he seem to be assured of himself? Was he confident? Was he assertive? Was he charismatic? Was he convincing? Was he able to articulate himself in a manner that sort of flow? Did he have sort of a continuity with respect to what he was saying and how he was saying it? So that's question number one. That's the form, right? And then there's the substance issue, right, which is the corollary question, which concerns itself with when he was talking about whatever his sales pitch happened to be, whether it's social reform, whether it's social welfare, whether it's universal education, whether it's remediating the issues addressed concerning COVID, whatever his substantive platform happened to be, did he do a pretty good job at making that argument in an intelligible and lucid way that actually resonated with you as somebody who's looking at this objectively and dispassionately, right? And again, don't come to this with your MAGA hat on, okay, right? Or don't come to this with your, I don't know, your Rastafarian Bob Marley T-shirt or your Che Guevara T-shirt on, right? Your Soviet political commissar's uniform on, right? And by the way, that's actually a false dichotomy there, or a false equivalence. The notion that the left, the liberals, the progressives, and the Democrats are somehow equivalent to the Stalinist regimes of the Soviet Union and the successor states of the Soviet Union and their ancillary, their satellite states. I mean, that's anybody who has even the most fundamental understanding of history would understand that that's a false equivalence. The regime of the Soviet Union was one of the most reactionary regimes, politically reactionary regimes, and conservative regimes that we've seen in the latter stages of the 20th century. So for people on the right to insinuate or impute that the left is somehow equivalent to communism is phantasmagorical and absurd on its face, as far as I can see. Okay, number three is the same question, but it pertains to President Trump. So again, it's asking you to look at whether or not did he make his points? Did he make them in a convincing and compelling way? What did he actually say? What was the substance? What was the form that he took? How was his form actually consistent with conveying a presidential decorum? Did he comport himself in a manner that's befitting of the expectations that most moderates would reasonably have of him? Because that's what I want you guys to try to pretend that you are. Or whether or not you're a moderate, I don't know. I can't presume or assume anything about this, right? But I want you to come to this with a degree of objectivity that may be incongruous with your actual perceptions as they're informed by your experiences or your lifestyle, whatever it happens to be. So that's really what I'm looking for here. Okay, in addition to whether or not you give me some salient and convincing analysis here. Number four, while maintaining political objectivity in a nonpartisan, dispassionate, analytical, conceptual framework, right? So this is just saying don't be prejudicial in your political assessment of your assessment of the politics of this debate. Discuss your reactions to how the moderator interacted with both candidates and include any inferences which you may reasonably derive from the nature of those interactions. In other words, do you think the moderator may have conceivably exceeded the scope of his authority or transgressed unduly on the speaking time of either candidate, or otherwise intentionally or unwittingly prejudiced one or both of the candidates on the basis of what he may have said or the manner in which he said it? So what I'm basically asking you is, did you think that the moderator behaved in a way that was truly consistent with the mandate of a moderator to fairly and impartially adjudicate the proceedings between these two rivaling opponents? Did he serve that function fairly and reasonably, or did he transgress upon the speaking time or the prerogatives of either the president or the former vice president? So look at what is the moderator supposed to do? Well, the moderator is supposed to moderate. Well, what does it mean to moderate? He's supposed to serve the same kind of function that a judge serves in a court, right? Not to take sides either way, to merely judge the facts as impartially and as fairly and rationally as he can. Okay, and indeed to moderate. And what does moderate mean? Well, it means also to ensure that the two constituent sides are adhering to the terms of the agreement, which they ostensibly consented to before the debate, right? Did President Trump and former Vice President Biden, did they conform themselves to the parameters, the strictures that they both mutually consented to, indeed conform themselves to before they even commenced with the debate? Or did they themselves transgress upon those parameters or violate the strictures of the debate? or behave in a manner that was totally incongruous with the expectations that you would reasonably have of somebody in the context of a presidential debate, right? And then did that necessarily give rise to sanctioning or interjecting by the moderator? And in fact, if the moderator was saying something in response to some transgression by one of the candidates, if the candidate was doing something he shouldn't have been doing, right? Or wasn't doing something he should have been doing, right? Then the moderator would have the right to interject himself in a way that admonished the candidate to circumscribe himself to the parameters of the debate. So that's sort of the analytical framework that you ought to have when you evaluate whether or not the moderator was doing what he should have been doing. Okay, so just remember that. Okay, number 5. What was the central message or theme that Vice President Biden was attempting to convey in his debate performance? So this is like much of these, all of these questions, I would say, actually, these questions are all open to interpretation. Okay, they're open to your own interpretation. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm just giving you free reign, complete liberality, and complete discretion to be as subjective as you want to be. That's the whole point. I don't want you to be subjective, right? But I want you to I want these questions to allow for some degree of interpretive latitude. So I'm not, and also I should also preface all of this by saying that I don't expect you to conform to my own particularized perceptions of what I think about either of these candidates, right? I don't want you thinking in your mind when you're answering these, whether you're writing your responses or typing your responses. I don't want you thinking in your mind, oh, I better say, or I better write what I think Jeff wants me to write. Don't do that. That ought not be the filter, the lens, right, from which you, or the logical position from which you proceed from. That's I don't care, right? Again, I'm somebody who has been conditioned through many years working in hospitality to be impervious to taking offense. Okay, I mean, you literally have to smack me upside the face, all right? Literally, right? Physically smack me upside the face, and in front of an audience that actually matters, for me to take anything personally. Okay, and if you're doing anything less than that, then chances are it's going to be off the back, under the water under the bridge, and I'm not going to care. So don't concern yourself. Don't allow this to enter into the calculus which informs how you go about proceeding in answering these questions. Don't think to yourself, oh, I better say something that doesn't offend Jeff, or I better say something that's consonant with the way he interprets the political facts, right? I don't care, right? What I'm looking for is some kind of original thought that is incipient to you, that originates with you. I prefer that you not just expropriate my own ideas and my own commentaries, and I mean, you can use that to inform your analysis, but I don't want you to just recapitulate back at me what I've already said in the course of this lecture or any other lecture for that matter. That's not what I'm looking for, right? I'm looking for some originalism with respect to what you're thinking and why you're thinking it. Okay. So what was the central message or theme of the vice president? What was he attempting to convey in general with respect to his debate performance? So what I want you to do is ask yourself, what overall, okay, generally speaking, if you look at what, if there was a common denominator, a common theme, a point that either he recurrently made, that he consistently came back to, or if you think that there was one point that was sort of preeminent and superseded the other points because this was the more important point, right? That's the thing that I want you to say, right? And tell me why it is you think that was the preeminent or the superlative point that he was trying to make. Why was that more substantial? What? And another way you could approach this, I guess, is ask I didn't ask this on the document itself, but you could ask yourself, what do you think he was trying to convey? What do you think his purpose was, right? And then tell me whether or not, what did he do in furtherance of making that case, and whether or not he did do that, right? Did he actually make the point that you think he was striving to make? Right, that's another way you could interpret this. So all of this is interpretive, right? That's the nature of politics. That's the nature of life, my friends. It's all interpretive. It's all arguendo, right? It's all a matter of interpretation. Who has a better argument? Who is able to persuade the people to see things in the way that is consistent with his perception, right? That's what politics essentially is. I've said it before. I'll say it again. I said it just now. Okay, number 6 is essentially the same question, but just asking that about President Trump. Okay, number 7, and I hope you guys are listening to this, right? Because this shit is important. Okay, I wouldn't be spending 49 minutes on this if it wasn't important. This is 70 points. This is a test, right? This is it's not actually a test, but it's like a test. It's a take-home test, right? I don't think that there's any good reason, any plausible reason that I can consider in my mind right now as to why any of you should think or say have cause to say 10 weeks hence, I didn't know what the hell was going on, right? Or even, I thought this was hard. I don't think, maybe if I didn't explain, if I didn't annotate everything here in the way that I'm expounding upon this stuff in very elaborate fashion, if I didn't do all that, then perhaps you would have the right to claim after the fact, well, there was some ambiguity. These questions, they were a bit too nuanced, Jeff. This is a graduate school. Are you trying to teach graduate school at Georgetown International Relations? What the hell is this, you Machiavellian bastard? You can't say that about this precisely because of what I'm doing right now. I'm interpreting these questions for you, and I don't think I think they lend themselves to a fairly intuitive interpretation. But even if they don't, I'm giving you the intuitive interpretation. So, and even if that doesn't work, even if this doesn't suffice to clarify precisely what it is I'm asking you to do to achieve the 70 points that are up for grabs as far as I'm concerned, even if that's insufficient, then reach out to me, for God's sakes. Pick up the phone, type out an email, all right? Bang it out, send it out to me, let me know. Question number 7. In your objective, ideologically unaffiliated estimation of the relative merits of each candidate in the context of his performance in the debate, who do you think was more effective in, number one, so this is the two-part question, number one, clearly and convincingly articulating his positions? It's part one of the question. Number two, enhancing his status as a viable candidate in relation to his opponent. Now, those things are not one and the same. Those things are not synonymous with each other, right? There is a difference and a distinction, and it has a difference, which is to say, what is it to ask yourself if somebody is clearly and convincingly articulating his positions? That's to say, is he making sense? Is what he is saying? Do you think what he is saying, is it resonating with not his base, not the people that Trump is actually talking to, right? That he's giving the dog whistling to, etc. Right? But is he making his case in a way that actually resonates strongly and lucidly and convincingly with the people who are the moderates, the people who are centrally situated on the ideological spectrum, who haven't necessarily made up their minds one way or the other, right? Is this message clearly resonating with them? Is he articulating it in a way that would make some sense of what he's trying to actually say? That's question number one. Right? So is he making the case in a way that actually seems as though it's persuasive, right? And is he articulating himself in a manner that is consistent with demonstrating that he actually knows what he's talking about, right? That's sort of what is implicit in part one of this question. Part two is he enhancing his status as a viable candidate in relation to his opponent, right? So does he seem to be? Do you think that in terms of his overall comportment, in terms of how he presents himself, in terms of how he represents himself, in terms of how he behaves in relation to the other guy, right? All these various metrics that you can use to evaluate his credibility, because that's essentially what this comes down to. Is this guy credible enough to get people to trust him, to vote for him? Okay, is he doing all that, and is he therefore enhancing his status? Right? Is he enhancing his status as a viable candidate in relation to his opponent? Right. So is Biden making himself look better than he did before in relation to Donald Trump by virtue of what he said or how he conducted himself in this debate? Or is he making himself look worse than he was before he came into the debate, right? So that's the proper analysis, right? That's the proper interpretive framework, analytical framework, is ask yourself the question. At time A, how good or how bad did Donald Trump look before he came into this debate? And then time B is after the debate, right? Was he much worse for the wear after the debate, right? Because of what he said, or because of how he comported himself, or because of how he acted in relation to the moderator, or in relation to Joe Biden? And then again, ask yourself the same question for Joe Biden, right? How good or bad did Joe Biden look before he came into this debate? And then as a consequence of what transpired in the course of the debate, how good or bad did he look after the fact, right? Did he look better? Did he come out better? And if so, why? Did he come out worse? And if so, why? That's what I'm asking you to address here. And this is a big question, right? And remember, these questions are all very substantial questions. There's only 7 questions. There's 70 points. That comes out to about 10 points. Well, exactly 10 points per question. They're not evenly, the distribution of points is not evenly allocated. So some of these questions are worth more points. And then, actually, I guess this is a 2-part question, but then I add the further stipulation that I say it is essential that your response to this question not be modulated by any particularized personal political prejudices which you may have, and that you make the case exclusively on the basis of the facts as you interpret and evaluate them, which is another way of saying that I don't want you making this case one way or the other because you have a particular partisan affiliation, because you like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, or because you like Donald Trump and Vice President Pence. Don't interject that. That has no place in in your answers. That has a place in the public forums where you engage in political discourse, but that has no place in response to this assignment. This is not the time or the place or the context for that. Okay. Closing escrow on that, hopefully, finally. Now I'm going to turn to where we left off last time. So we were talking about I was making sort of a semantic argument, right? I was looking at what the authors were saying about tyranny, and they seem to be implying that in some way, in some, I think, metaphorical way, that tyranny was in many ways the absolute antithesis of virtue. Okay, that tyranny was antithetical to virtue. I think that was the point that they were trying. I believe that was the point they were trying to make. I'm sorry. That virtue rather was synonymous with liberty. Excuse me. Those are two very different propositions. That virtue was synonymous with liberty, right? And I said that that's actually not the case. That's not. I don't think that virtue is necessarily synonymous with liberty, because you can always increase virtue, and that will in and of itself be a good thing. You can never be a person who is too virtuous, but you cannot say that about liberty. And the reason you can't say that about liberty goes to some of the issues that are implicit and I think inextricably associated with the nature of our republic. Is that if you allow the citizens to have unrestricted, unrestrained liberty, that there are no positive affirmative checks that constrain what they can and cannot do, then, well, again, what you presuppose about human nature is going to sort of influence how you come down on this. But I think that we all have to concede that it's unlikely that if in fact there were no positive restrictions in terms of how people could behave, and you have to believe this if you're going to criminal justice, I think. And I know a couple of you actually are criminal justice students. You're aspiring future police officers, and God bless you. You know, more power to you. You guys know that I know what that's like. I was in police academy myself, and it's never been a more difficult time to be a police officer. But we need them now more than ever. So if you're a good person, you have a sense of decency and integrity, go out there and do that. Do what you need to do. But I think that even if you're not somebody going into law enforcement, I guess just more generically, if you're a pragmatist, if you're a realist, you don't have to be cynical like me, for instance. You can just be a realist. And I think you have to admit that if we don't have any affirmative checks that restrain people from behaving in a certain way or conforming themselves to a particular societal expectation that is codified through the legislation that we actually enact, if you don't have that, if you don't have those strictures, then I think that it is more likely than not, that we are going to descend into a situation whereby it's every man for himself, and it goes back into a Hobbesian state of nature, and that's a very bad thing, not just for some, but I would say for all, or for most anyways, unless you're Achilles, or I don't know, you're John Cena, or I don't know who you'd be, right? Those guys in a state of nature, John Cena would be the king of the jungle. He'd be Simba, okay? He'd be the alpha dog. He'd be the alpha male. I mean, he already is the alpha male in many ways, but not actually, because guns, of course, firearms are the great equalizer, right? I could be Stephen Hawking, right? I could have ALS, and I could be in a wheelchair. I guess that's a bad example because he wouldn't be able to pull a trigger. But let's say he's got an automated wheelchair that's connected with a shotgun, right? And he can just say, shotgun, initiate, and he can shoot somebody. Well, theoretically, Stephen Hawking is Trump's John Cena. Without a shotgun, assuming John Cena just goes in there without weapons. But the point here is that you can't say that virtue is or that liberty is a good thing in an absolute sense. You can't say that. And I made the case for why I don't believe that you can make that assertion last time. So just remember what I said. Now I've got a picture of a man who is very near and dear to my heart, a man who is beloved of the people, a man who is a great man in many ways, innumerable ways. You guys probably think he's actually my secret homosexual lover. No, I think I've already said that I don't have that particular predilection. Not that matters, but I don't know. Maybe if I was a gay man, I'd probably say he's actually a pretty handsome guy as well. And I can say that as a solvent heterosexual male who's very safe and secure in my sexuality. But no, I have a shrine to Mel Gibson, actually. Mel Gibson, of course, is who I'm referring to. If you guys are following along with the slides, this is the slide that's got a picture of Mel Gibson from the movie. Some of you will know this, some of you will not, but this is a trivia question. Where's this screen cap from? It's from The Patriot, of course. It's actually on Netflix right now. It's on Netflix. It's been on Netflix since the beginning of October. Go out there and watch it if you haven't seen it. It's a great movie. Very patriotic movie. Pardon the pun. It wasn't very much of a pun. And in this movie, Mel Gibson plays the swamp fox is the appellation that the British give him, because he's the founder of guerrilla warfare, essentially, or one of the founding fathers of guerrilla warfare. Not really the founder, because you can go all the way back in history and you can find instances where in the ancient world, Hannibal, the Bactrians, and modern day Afghanistan 3,000 years ago, fighting against the Macedonians, there were instances of other guerrilla warfare proponents. But I think in the modern day sense, using unconventional tactics, employing asymmetrical warfare against an adversary who had numerical advantages, technological advantages, economic and strategic advantages, etc. This guy, I think his name was Benjamin Martin, was the historical character. And he was an actual guy. Now, of course, the Mel Gibson version of the real the historical figure, Benjamin Martin, the Patriot, the eponymous title of the movie, is about as factually and historically correct a representation as his idealization of Braveheart. Of course, that was another movie by Mel Gibson, and everybody's looking at these movies and they're saying that there's some continuity here to these movies. There's an underlying theme here, and it's Anglophilia. He is an Anglophobia, excuse me, not Anglophilia. Anglophilia is love for all things Anglican, originating from England. He's an Anglophobe. He hates England. He despises England. He's contemptuous or fearful of England. You can maybe discern that. I don't know whether or not that's a recurrent theme, but I think that you can perhaps contrive that out of the movie. But anyways, my cinematic commentary notwithstanding, one of the things that Benjamin Martin, the character, the actual historical figure portrayed by Mel Gibson in this film, says, he's got this quote. There's this scene where the South Carolina convention, the legislative convention, comes together, and you've got these various delegates that are representing the various constituent counties in South Carolina, and they're debating as to whether or not they're going to join Virginia and essentially declare war against the British. And are they going to join in what will eventuate into the Revolutionary War? Are they going to be patriots, or are they going to sit along on the sidelines and just be ambivalent and indifferent and see what happens? Well, you guessed it, right? He wouldn't have been the patriot if he had sat on the sidelines. So the Virginia, or the South Carolina House of Delegates, votes in favor of war against the British. And in the course of the disputation that precedes this vote, one of Mel Gibson's character is arguing with this other guy, and they're going back and forth about how King George is a tyrant and how he's acting unilaterally, how his parliament is infringing upon the sovereign rights of the colonists, etc., etc. And Mel Gibson's character, in retort to this assertion that a parliament or a legislative convention is going to somehow represent a paradigm shift or a complete transformation, a benevolent transformation for the sake of the people, that this is going to be all good. It's just going to be exclusively good, right? His reply to that assertion, that insinuation that, well, having an elected legislature is going to be a good thing, right? Here's what he says: "Why should I trade one tyrant 3,000 miles away for 3,000 tyrants 1 mile away? An elected legislature can trample a man's rights just as easily as a king can." I think that's a fair point. Now, I can't do my best Mel Gibson impression because I'm not actually in front of you guys in the flesh right now. So the thespian in me has been exercised because I just don't have a live studio audience. So I can't do my theatrics. Maybe I'll do it if you guys really want to see my Mel Gibson impression, I'll do it when I see you guys on the 27th. But it's actually pretty good. It's almost as good as my Gladiator impression. I think this is a fair point, okay? And this point is in many ways a segue into the discussion that we're about to embark upon, which is to evaluate whether or not having a system, notwithstanding the fact that it has checks and balances, right? Even though you have that, okay? But if the system empowers a legislative convention, whether it's the Congress, whether it's the House of Representatives, the Senate, whether it's the Parliament, whatever you want to call it, right? Is a legislative convention, okay, an elected body of representatives, right? Is that in and of itself something that will disallow for the possibility of an abrogation or a misappropriation of the fundamental rights of the citizenry? Is it inconceivable? Is it impermissible? Is it impossible that a legislature could ever contrive to promulgate laws that may dispossess people of their fundamental rights or may infringe upon their fundamental rights? I don't think that's inconceivable. In fact, trying to contemporize this discussion, if you think about what some of the naysayers who are the most substantial detractors from the Biden-Harris campaign are saying right now, what are they asserting is going to happen if Biden and Harris get in there? Well, they're essentially insinuating that this point about the legislature having the capacity to trample a man's right just as easily as a king can, that is a very salient point, and now more so than ever, because imagine this. If the Democrats win the White House, if Biden and Harris go to the White House, if the Democrats continue to maintain their majority in the House of Representatives, which they have, because the Speaker of the House is Nancy Pelosi, you guys should know that. If they usurp, if they're able to acquire a majority in the Senate, which right now they don't, the Senate is controlled by the Republicans, but by a margin of I think 3 senators. If in fact both the legislative branches, right? We have a bicameral legislature, which means that we have 2 houses of Congress, the upper house is the Senate and the lower house is the House of Representatives. If both those go to the Democrats and the White House goes to the Democrats, then what is conceivable? What may conceivably flow from that situation politically as a consequence of that? Well, the Democrats who would be voted in as new members of mostly the Senate, because they already control the House of Representatives, the new senators and indeed the sitting members of the House of Representatives would construe that as a mandate that they had been given by the American people, the citizenry who participated in the election and gave them this mandate. And the mandate would essentially be interpreted as one which would allow them to have a free hand to exercise complete discretion in terms of how they thought they should amend or reform or revise existing laws in a way that was more consonant to the ideological interests of the progressives who voted them into office. And what that could conceivably, I'm not saying this is very likely or probable, because I don't want to play into the fears and the trepidation and the anxiety that I'm sure is endemic to many of you right now if you've been following the news cycle. What I want to say is that if the legislature, if it is permissible for the legislature, and by the way, it is, depending on whether or not you have a supermajority, depending on how many people you can actually convince to vote for this, but if it's permissible for the legislature to, number one, adjust the composition of the Supreme Court, right, and number two, revise or repudiate, overthrow, veto existing amendments, or severely constrain the rights that devolve or derive from those amendments, is it inconceivable, therefore, proceeding from those fundamental assumptions, which you have to assume that take those for granted. Don't assume that, right? Those are facts, right? But if, in fact, hypothetically speaking, the Democrats were to take over the Congress, right, and both houses of Congress, and the presidency, the Oval Office as well, is it inconceivable to your mind that they could, in fact, reform the Supreme Court and fill the Supreme Court with more liberal and progressive justices? And that Supreme Court would then go ahead and vindicate and authenticate whatever laws the Congress would promulgate, and the Congress is going to promulgate whatever laws they think are consistent with the interests of the people who put them there. And if the people who put them there are the Democrats, because the Democrats achieved a majority, assuming that's what happens in the next election cycle, this is, again, what this is, if you guys haven't assimilated yourself to this point, let me tell you what this is, what November 3rd, 2020 really is. It's a referendum on the last 4 years. That's what any presidential re-election is, the incumbent, right? When he's, in this case, it's Trump, whether it's Obama in 2008, doesn't matter, okay? The re-election of any presidential candidate is ipso facto a referendum. It's a vote on whether or not the people believed that he's done a good job in ameliorating the concerns that they originally had, or if he has done a bad job by exacerbating the underlying issues that existed when he came into power, right? And that's what this fundamentally comes down to, at least for the people who are in the middle, the moderates. Now, of course, the ideological fringes are going to vote in accordance with their particular convictions, and they're implacable and immovable with respect to those convictions. So they don't matter. They don't count. I'm talking about the people who are actually amenable to change with respect to their perceptions of who's a good candidate and who's not. And I think that those people actually are more valuable as citizens. I don't want to discount anybody who's a rabid, fanatical supporter of Donald Trump, but I would just ask you, what are the reasons as to why? Can you articulate those reasons in a way that will persuade and convince somebody who's a moderate, who's looking at them analytically, intelligently, rationally, objectively? Can you convince that person as to why you're right and they're wrong, right? Or why you're right and they're ambivalent, why they're maybe they're not wrong, but they're not right, okay? And the same applies for somebody who's a supporter of Kamala Harris or Joe Biden, for that matter, right? Can you articulate yourself in a way that expresses your particular political platform in a way that allows for that platform to resonate with somebody who is objective, dispassionate, undecided with respect to who they're going to vote for and why? Can you express your particular political platform in a way that would convince that person that you are supporting your position because it is a rational position, because it is just, because it is consistent with the highest and the best interest of the majority of the people who live in this country? And if you can't do that, then I submit to you that you're just voting for the reasons that are not the good reasons, right? Tribalism, because you affiliate with this particular constituency, because your father voted this way, or because your grandfather, or because your uncle told you to do this, or etc. Those are never good reasons, right? Dispossess yourself of the subjective considerations and look at this objectively. All right, take the veil of ignorance. Going back to what I was saying, this is 4 or 5 weeks ago, we talked about this philosophical concept, the veil of ignorance, right? You have to presuppose when you're promulgating laws, when you're enacting legislation, when you're voting, when you're in that booth, when you close the curtain and you're in that booth and you're pulling on the lever, presuppose that you're voting in the interests of people who don't look like, or you don't know what they look like, you don't know what they sound like, you don't know what their color of the skin is, you don't know where they live, you don't know what their socioeconomic status is, you don't know anything about them personally or experientially or anecdotally or any other way. So they could be similarly situated to you, they could be somebody completely different than you. You have to assume that when you participate in democracy. And I'm making this point right now forcefully and vehemently and assertively because it's a point that you all need to remember when November 3rd comes around, or if you send in your mail-in vote. I don't know how your mail-in ballots. Maybe you do it that way. But remember this point, okay? Take it to heart, because I don't think enough people are focusing strenuously enough upon this particular element of civic duty, civic responsibility. Civic responsibility is not following your ideological convictions and letting them lead you wherever that may lead you. Rather, it's doing what is in the best interest of the citizenry as a whole, doing what is in the best interest of the country as a whole. And to do anything less than that, to my mind, is unconscionable. Sorry, didn't mean to go on a diatribe there. All right. Declaration of Independence. So let's talk about why the Declaration of Independence was sort of new. It was innovative with respect to what it was recommending, what it was promulgating, what it was creating for our nation. Okay, what it was doing. Okay, what was the import of it? Revolutionary in its character as well as in its prose. Okay, prose is just the style of language that it uses. The first foundational charter to codify and enshrine the tripartite rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Let me read the second bullet point of the slide, because this is a corollary to the first point here. Are rights that are self-evident and unalienable also guaranteed? Question number 1. All right, ponder that. To what extent can such rights be divested of a citizen? Also, has the right to pursue happiness been deferred or categorically, or deferred to, excuse me, has the right to happiness been deferred to categorically, or has it been engendered a divisive debate? Right. So what does it mean when we say that rights are self-evident? Well, it means that on the face of it, if you look at how societies and how governments have existed and how civilized people have lived, really going all the way back at least to the Magna Carta, which is the Great Charter, the charter that was written between King John from the Tale of Robin Hood, and he actually was a historical figure and not a fictitious invention of the person who invented the story of Robin Hood. But King John was required to essentially acknowledge the barons, the aristocracy of England at the time. This is medieval England. This is the 13th century, the early 1200s. King John was compelled to come to a place in England known as Runningmead, I think that's the name of the place. It's some stupid English name, and he had to acknowledge that all men have certain fundamental rights. That there are certain rights that cannot be disenfranchised, that cannot be dispossessed of a man, unless there is some procedure by which we ensure that we do not dispossess this person of their rights without proper procedures, without proper procedural protections. Which is to say that we treat them in a way that's equitable. We give equitable consideration to the interest of preserving their rights, but if we dispossess them of those rights, we ensure that there is a good soluble reason as to why we're doing that. Now, again, this goes all the way back. This goes back to the 1200s, right? Now, this foundational charter, the Declaration of Independence, was written some 550 years after the Magna Carta, the Magna Carta is just Latin for the Great Charter or the Great Writ, okay, the great document, okay, right, the great document that essentially is a contract, is a social contract between the king and the citizenry. Not just the barons, not just the aristocrats, not just the higher echelon members of society, right? But all Englishmen. Okay, it was a contract. It was a social contract between the king, the sovereign ruler of the state, and all citizens. And what this is, to my mind, anyways, what the Declaration of Independence is evocative of in many ways is it's a recapitulation or a reinforcement of the fundamental rights, the two fundamental rights that incipiently trace their origins all the way back to the Magna Carta, the Great Charter, right? Back to Runningmead, 1220, King John from Robin Hood, etc. Right? Life and liberty. All Englishmen had those rights. Those were considered to be fundamental rights that any Englishman had by virtue of being an Englishman. Okay, you didn't have to be a nobleman. You didn't have to be a member of the clergy. You didn't have to have any wealth or privilege or prestige, or it wasn't a matter of who you knew, etc. It was endemic. It was inherent. It was incipient. It was rights that were associated with you as an Englishman. Right now, it's important for me to add this caveat. I'm saying English man, right? Not an English woman, or not an English child, or not an English servant, an indentured servant, or not a slave, because as far as the Englishmen were concerned, those people didn't count. They didn't count. They were chattel. They were personal property, right? But the rights of life and liberty were rights whose continuity had been maintained and preserved and guaranteed all throughout the preceding 500 years, all the way up to the 1770s, when this charter was, when this document was actually codified. Now, adding to that is the right to pursue happiness. The right to pursue happiness, right? What is now that to me is really, I think that's all you need to know about this country. And people say that this is the great melting pot. This is the place where give us you're tired, you're hungry, you're poor, you're sick, you're discontented. That was written, that was inscribed. It still is actually inscribed on the base plate of the Statue of Liberty there in New York Harbor. Okay, and it was a clarion call to all the immigrants, whether they were from Ireland during the Great Potato Famine, whether they were from Italy during the economic strife and the chaos there in the 1920s, whether they're from Germany fleeing fascism and Nazism in the 1930s, whether they're from Russia fleeing the pogroms of Stalin and the Bolsheviks who came after him, right? Regardless of where they're from, this is a country that guarantees not just life and liberty, right? But we also allow for you to pursue your happiness, right? Now, you can pursue your happiness so long as the pursuit of that happiness does not infringe upon or transgress against the right of other people, of other citizens, to pursue their happiness. So again, this goes back to the dichotomy between liberty and security, okay? Liberty and order maintenance. And this is a very careful balancing act. It's a very precarious balancing act that we have to get just right with respect to how we legislate and how deferential we are in giving consideration to the interests of people to actually have these indissoluble rights. Now, what does it mean when are all rights, just going back to the question, this is not a rhetorical question, it's one that's actually meant to elucidate some kind of response. Are all rights that are self-evident and unalienable, are they also guaranteed? Well, that begs the question, which I think is the corollary question, which you have to ask yourself: is there therefore anything that you can do that can cause the state to interpose itself in a way that would dispossess you of certain of these rights that are otherwise unalienable and self-evident. Well, what rights are self-evident? What rights are unalienable? Well, again, the right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that you are free from harassment in your person and in your belongings, in your property, right? You are free from harassment. You are free from having people infringe upon your property rights, because property rights were very important to the founding fathers. Now, why would that be the case? Think about this in terms of just, this is more of an anthropological assessment than it is a strictly political one. But why would property rights be very important and indeed dispositive in terms of influencing how it was they went about writing the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution which came after it? Well, think about what these guys, who were these people? They were farmers for the most part. These guys were all large landowners, okay? And everybody in the colony, unless you were a member of the urban bourgeoisie, you were a blacksmith, or you were a, I don't know, an alchemist. I don't know what you were doing in the cities in Boston or whatever at the time. You were, a printer or something like that, right? Unless you had an urban or quasi-urban profession, and the majority of the people, the colonists, and indeed the early period of American history, the vast majority of the citizens of this country early on, anyways, were rural citizens. Now, the balance has shifted now. There's many more people concentrated in the cities right now than there are in the rural areas, and that's the problem with the Electoral College, is that it doesn't necessarily reflect those demographic dichotomies in a way that's, I think, equitable. But that's a different story for a different day. But back then, most of the people were agrarian, and they were cultivating the land. So that's the reason why when they're talking about liberty, okay, they're not just talking about the personal liberty that's associated with you, right? Your personhood. Okay, and that's what liberty essentially is right? Means that's the connotation that it has, anyways. When you look at interpretations of this phraseology, right, of the prose, the language that is being used in the context, not just the Declaration of Independence, but the Constitution itself, you look at subsequent interpretations of that language, and people are always imputing different meanings to liberty. Well, it's not just that you have liberty in the sense that you have liberty in your person. Okay, you have liberty to be free from being restrained, right? So this goes to the Fourth Amendment, right? Unreasonable search and seizure, you have protection against unreasonable arrest. You have freedom from undue restraint. You can't be physically restrained, right? Because that constitutes an arrest of your person, because you're being restricted. Your movement's being restricted, right? We have that, and that is something that's implicit to the concept of liberty. Is that you have liberty. What does liberty really mean? It means discretion. You have discretionary control over how you comport, how you conduct yourself, your personal affairs, so long as your conducting of those affairs, again, is not incongruous with the interests of other people to conduct their affairs. So that means I have liberty to get up and walk around right now. I have liberty to start throwing things around this office if I wanted to, right? I have liberty to do that. Do I have liberty to shoot my Glock 30 9mm handgun out this window over here? Down there, you guys can't see, there's a street out there. There's a street about, I don't know, 500 yards from my house here. Do I have liberty to do that? Well, no, because that may conceivably result in the reckless endangerment of somebody else whose liberty interest would then be infringed upon. Okay, so again, going back to Voltaire, your rights end where mine begin, right? Or my rights end where yours begin. Okay. Is it true though to say that just because rights are self-evident, right, that we take these rights, we take these truths to be self-evident? Now, what are these truths that are self-evident? Well, it's self-evident that men, all men, are, number one, created equal, right? And number two, they have these inalienable rights which they cannot be dissociated from, or cannot be dissociated from the person himself, right? They are rights that are inextricably associated with the individual. Okay, the right to be free from restriction, impositions upon what you can do, your personal liberty. But then the further question is there anything you can do that will result in your being dispossessed of these fundamental liberties, these fundamental rights? To what extent can such rights be divested of the citizen? Well, this goes to the power of the government. In fact, not just the power of the government, but the imperative, the quintessential need that the government has to be able to control the citizens in a way that ensures that these people are not acting out in an unrestricted way with complete liberty and complete discretion. And so, yes, you can. What can you do either in contemporary society or in early modern American society, what could you conceivably do that would cause the government to have an affirmative interest in dispossessing you of your rights? Well, let me ask you this: if you're a prisoner sitting on death row up in Attica, upstate in New York, right? Or if you're in Sing Sing or San Quentin or Pelican Bay, okay, right, in California, right? If you're any one of the main supermax prisons out there, or any of the supermax prisons, doesn't matter where you're at. If you're a death row prisoner, do you have an absolute right to all the certain rights that every other citizen has because you're in a penal institution, you're in a correctional institution? No, you don't have certain rights. There are certain rights which you have voided by virtue of your criminal behavior. Okay, so the way this essentially goes, I mean, the precept, the principle here is, as long as you conform yourself to the expectations of society as they have been expressed in the laws that are being legislated by the legislature, the Congress, as long as you conform yourself and restrain yourself in terms of your impulses to those conditions that society expects you to conform yourself to, as long as you're not infringing upon the sensibilities, the common sensibilities, which we as a society, we as a culture have expressed through our laws and codified in our legislation, as long as you're not doing any of that, then you're fine, right? But when you begin to act in a manner that's inconsistent with the interests, the highest and the best collective interests of civil society, then we say at that point, I mean, this is the basis of all criminal proceedings. It's also, it goes to retributive justice, and there's other principles here, but I think the fundamental philosophical principle is, when you begin to act out in a manner that is in direct contravention of other people's fundamental rights, or if you begin to act out in a manner that is contrary to, right, or incongruous with, in contravention of the collective interests of society as a whole, then the government, as the sovereign power which expresses the will of the people, which acts for the people, on behalf of the people, and in the interest of the people, then the government is going to intervene itself, interject itself, intrude itself in a very obtrusive manner, and then dispossess you of certain rights, because you have thus far proven yourself incapable of exercising those rights in a truly judicious and fair manner, which is conscientious and gives fair consideration to the due liberty interests of the people around you, as well as consideration for the collective interests of society as a whole. And so if you do behave in a manner that is incongruous with, or inconsonant with, or inconsistent to the interests of society as a whole, as has been adumbrated by the codification by the legislature, well, then we do dispossess you of certain rights and certain liberties. Can you be dispossessed of liberty? Yes, that's easy. Of course you can be dispossessed of liberty, right? When you go to prison, when you go to jail, you are, therefore, by definition, you are dispossessed of liberty. You're dispossessed of you're not at liberty to just roam around and get in your car and drive around. You lose your discretionary capacity to physically move around, right? So that's the most fundamental liberty that we have, is just to get up out of the seat and to turn off this, to discontinue giving this lecture, because I'm coming up on an hour and a half right now, and now I'm actually beginning to transgress upon your own personal time. So actually, I'm going to exercise my own liberty and grab this mouse over here, and I'm going to say, I'm going to bid you adieu, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen, Kameraden, and remember, assignment is due October 27th. Remember, save the date. Okay, if you guys got any questions concerning anything I've talked about thus far, especially as they relate to the assignment, okay, make sure you ask those questions and clarify this sooner rather than later. All right, I don't want to be ambushed by a bunch of questions. Oh, well, what did you? Well, you guys don't sound like that, but oh, Jeff, what did you mean when you were asking this question? I don't get this whole substance versus form business. What's this about the debate? Don't ask those questions the day before. Don't ask those questions the Monday after this, next Monday, the 26th, the Monday the 26th. Don't ask those questions the Monday of the 26th, that night. Don't ask those questions, because I'm not going to answer it at that time. Right? Ask those questions now. Ask them preemptively. Okay. Okay, guys. I hope that the next time I see you will be physically in person, and I will hopefully be able to desist from these YouTube videos, because I know not everybody's a fan of these things. And I was going to shut up right now and say goodbye, and you guys take care, and I'll see you guys in about 10 days. Thanks for watching.